Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday evening to you, and welcome to Into the Outer Realms. This is episode 171, and you can see that I have my allies with me tonight, Ganesh and Buddha. So that means that we're talking about a spiritual topic tonight, and I'm very happy and very much looking forward to speaking with our guest tonight, who I've known through the miracle, through the mermaid technology, if you will, of the internet, but we met for the first time, to actually speak when Tanya, just a little bit ago, when Tanya and I had our art center in West Virginia in Fairmont. And I know we have very many audience who have stayed with us through that time, through the new Mystic Center for Arts and Education. And it's always good to see you all. That we were going to have Zane come for some workshops, but he keeps very busy. He travels a lot. And we're going to talk tonight about shamanism, and the shamanism specifically that he's studied, that he practices, is nature mysticism. And we're going to talk about some very interesting things too that I'm very much looking forward to. So I'm going to be quiet right now. I want to welcome you all again, and I'm going to roll the intro. And when we come back, brief bio, and then we're going to talk to Zane for the next hour. So welcome, everyone. So good to have you here.
There exists a realm beyond our wildest dreams, a realm beyond reality that the gatekeepers and guardians have always told us consists of nothing but tricks of the eye, weather balloons, swamp gas, sand cranes, fairy tale myths of monsters, crackpot conspiracy theories, and desperate cries for attention.
We know this realm exists, and it's just beyond the horizon. The preset path, the well-worn walkways where the cynics want us to stay.
Instead, give this a listen. Put on your headphones, adjust your volume, close your eyes, and fasten your mental seatbelts, because the twilight-tinged turnoff from reality's alluring highway is looming just ahead.
We're about to leave the plane of the easily explained, couldn't possibly be's, and the no way I just saw what I saw's, for the spaces and places where everything is possible, and if you stay long enough, even probable. We're about to take a journey into the outer realms.
All right, so here we go. Zane Curfman, known as Don Zane to his students and godchildren, is the author of Inca Mountain Magic and has been serving his community as a healer and spiritual leader for more than 20 years. Zane is a Sancista Espiritista Brujo, or fully initiated priest of the Afro-Caribbean tradition of Sansa. He is also a priest and healer in several Paco Cuna traditions, which is Peruvian shamanism. He was tasked by his indigenous teachers to adapt and share these teachings with the Western world, and I'm glad that he's here to share them with the Into the Realms audience tonight. To this end, he put together the Qatari tradition of cross-cultural shamanism, the Wild Hearts Medicine Society, and many live and online programs of spiritual development. Again, we are very fortunate and blessed to have him with us here tonight. So let's please give him an Into the Outer Realms welcome, Zane Curfman. Hi, Zane.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm excellent. I'm so glad to have you here. So let's dive right in.
Sounds good.
I always like to ask our audience, because there's so many people ask guests on behalf of the audience. So many audience members are walking the path, making new discoveries all the time. It's a big reason why they watch the show, and I try to give them a large swath of what's out there. So how did you start on this path?
Well, it's a really interesting series of events. First of all, I was always very spiritual. My father was a Baptist missionary preacher, and my mother, she was a housewife, but she had a powerful psychic gift. She would have these dreams, but because she was fundamentalist Christian, she never developed that gift to its fullest potential. But I got to see how she would get insights into, especially one dream that she would have would always tell misfortune for someone, dire misfortune, usually like them dying or having a severe accident. And I remember as a child, her just frantically, after having one of these dreams, she would just call all the relatives trying to get a hold of whoever she was dreaming about. And at the beginning, early in my childhood, she hardly ever caught them in time. So there was like 4 or 5 times that, we weren't able to do anything positive to help them not have that. And that was really hard on her. And so, but it also gave her a proven track record with her family. That she would go, just reaching out to everyone, trying to find someone on the day that these misfortunes would always happen. So she really instilled in me to, even though these things happen and they're strange to us, to take note of what is happening, to take note of what you're seeing and things like that. I only wish she would have developed it further. My father was a Baptist missionary preacher, but he was also a Freemason. So he had a real love in his heart for mystical type of things, So I was kind of brought up in that type of atmosphere. His mother was a type of Christian brujo or witch. And on my mother's side, her mother, she, when someone was sick, she would go out into the woods and build altars and things like that. And, so there's a lot of like, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a lot of mystical practices in that area of Appalachia, of West Virginia, stretching down into Tennessee. And so I was just kind of brought up in that kind of atmosphere. But I started having a lot of interesting kinds of premonitions and things like that throughout my teenage years. And to skip forward so that I don't get too in depth in that whole conversation. Around 21 or so, I got into contact with a spirit, and it was a rainbow serpent. And it told me its name, and I couldn't understand its name. The only 2 words I knew that sounded like it were Tulsi, like the basil, and dulce, sweet in Spanish. So I really wasn't sure what the name was. So I went with the Tulsi because it just felt better to me. And anyway, it started teaching me, and it took me into this really extended period of about a year of really in-depth spiritual teaching directly from this spirit, just teaching me ways of doing healings. It taught me like a Qigong kind of procession that I saw. I didn't really think of Qigong, but an energy dance kind of thing to strengthen its qualities within you and to help you to develop the medicine body so you could do this work. And one of the things it taught me was this practice of taking in energy into the navel. And then when it was in the navel, and it would be the sickness of the person as well, that you would just drink it straight into the navel. And in the navel, it would actually split. And I'd almost see like the center of a galaxy spinning around in my navel. And it would split into these 2 streams, and they would come up and down through me. And it would just create this kind of vortex or this tubatorus kind of energy. That's a later, looking back on it. But I didn't really know what was going on there. And of course, I was new to that level, that depth of spirituality. I was more of a mystic in my younger life, up until my 20s. But I was kind of new to this spirit coming straight out and speaking like that. Nature spoke to me, but that was different, So I was kind of like, am I making this all up? Because, imagination is a big part of the spiritual world. You have to cultivate your imagination if you want to have those deep types of spiritual experiences, because it's actually a doorway into those experiences. So I was like, am I imagining this? Did I make it up? I mean, there's so much cool things, but what's going on? So I started just searching, and it was the early days of the internet and stuff. So it was slow searching. But does anyone do this thing where they bring it in their navel and it splits into 2 streams? And, I found some Tibetan practices were similar, but it wasn't exactly that. And then I was reading this thing about an anthropology professor had written in Cusco, and it was talking about the Quero Indians, which are a group of Quechuan Indians that live high above Cusco in the mountains there. And pretty much they were left alone by the Spanish. There were some Spanish ranchers that went up there, and they started some ranches and kind of enslaved them, but it wasn't like they weren't forced to stay on the ranch or anything, but they were nearby, and they got a lot of labor out of these people. But anyway, I found that they were doing this technique, this thing of bringing energy into their navel and then splitting it into, and that they would actually see it as taking in what they call hucha, which just means heaviness, from another person and transmuting it, turning it back into light. So I was like, whoa, I gotta reach out to this person, because that spirit that I called Tulsi, she told me that she was going to always be showing me my next step spiritually. And this has been perfect, even though I don't, it's like everything she taught me through the rest of my life to this point, I still go back to it, because I'll learn something and then I will remember, oh, that was actually taught to me back at the beginning of this whole thing, but I just didn't know the depth of it until I found it in this tradition. So yeah, that was really how I got into it. And then I reached out to him, and we met, and it was really a good experience. And then after that, I communicated with the tribe itself and ended up going up to the villages, which is called the Quero Nation. And I have a goddaughter there, and was made part of one of the communities and got to work with the high medicine chiefs up there. So it was been a really great experience all around.
Wow. Wow, there's so much there. I had an experience with a serpent in 2002. I was starting on my meditation journey, working with mantra, doing some astral traveling, lucid dreaming, especially through the work of Robert Moss. And I was deep in meditation, and I saw the snake, the head, just sort of fill my whole field of vision, and the eye opened up. It was this bright yellow eye. It was right there. Quite frankly, it scared the hell out of me, and I jumped right out of the meditation. But have been working. A dear friend of mine, who's French, recently said, "It's time for you to get back on your belly. It's time for you to do serpent energy." And I have as a reminder, I have my serpent right here every day.
Awesome.
Just to remember sometimes. So that is cool. So I had mentioned to you, I was gonna talk about all the different kinds of shamanism I studied and all. Just forget about all that. Folks, there's lots. Every culture has a form. But Zane, to you, if you were to, and I know you do a lot of workshops and a lot of teaching, how do you define shamanism?
Well, I give a couple different definitions for shamanism, because there actually are. So originally, the word itself comes from a Tungus-Siberian word. And really, that's the only quote unquote true shamans, because they're the only ones where that word was of their culture. But what happened was that was about the 1400s. There was some French, Russian, and German or Dutch at that point travelers that were going into that area of Russia and trying to trade and create, different types of trade routes, and also church clerics. And that's where they first encountered the word shaman. And of course, the church was academia at that time. So they were the ones that were writing it down, what they were doing. They saw it as heresy, but they were writing it all down. Then when they came to the New World, they noticed some New World practices, and they remembered in their notes and in their studies this thing called shamanism that came from that Siberian region. And they were looking at what was the same, animism and connecting to the spirits through rituals. And for the most part, that became the new definition of shamanism. It's any culture or belief system that has an animistic quality to it, but then on top of that has created elaborate rituals around that animism and has certain relationships with certain spirits, nature spirits, and also spirits of the lineage and tradition. So when you find those elements, it is academically correct to call that shamanism. So those are the two basic definitions I go by, but I believe it's a much larger thing than even that. I believe it's our inbred spirituality is something that's innate. It's an innate quality within us and something that we develop. And of course, is every human a shaman? That's up for debate to some degree. But every human can benefit from what shamanism teaches, because it teaches you to be self-reliant. It teaches you to go to yourself first for answers. And then if you can't find them, then to go outside of that circle. But it actually gives you a one-on-one experience with spirit. That's really what all of our teachings and stuff are about, is to get you an experience that you can then recreate for yourself, that you can create the trance states, you can go into those spaces, you can have the communications and how you communicate with different spirits. And that's something that can help anyone grow, so I see it a lot like that. I see it as part of, in a sense, the human potential movement. It's unraveling something that's inside of us that we all have. In our tradition, it's a seed, and we see it right here, a muhukoya. But we're developing that thing. And when it starts to develop, it's where we end up on a crossroads between our life path and our spirit path. And where that crossroads comes together, we have amazing amounts of potential that we can step into. That's what a crossroads is. You're standing there and you have all these options in front of you. And shamanism, it really, whatever form it takes, what it teaches you is to be self-reliant and strong enough to take a step in one of those directions. Because standing in the crossroads, you're not ever going to progress just because you have all these roads open to you. You only progress when you choose one and put your energy toward that one and then make the step forward and start to move forward. And then you will reach another crossroads. But, it's all about empowering yourself to the point where you can rely on yourself and your connection with nature. And then if you don't know what's going on, you can ask a teacher, because there's a lineage that supports you. That's one other thing that I think is important with shamanism, is there is some type of lineage going back.
Right. So Mary Lee is saying hello, and Trish is saying hello. You got some fans in the audience today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Into the Outer Realms. So those were some very refreshing and I think very empowering definitions. I love that, because I was raised Catholic. In recent times, in the past couple of years, I had some sickness and really felt pulled to my lineage, and had three great grandmothers who, one interpreted dreams for everyone, and one could foresee deaths, and the other one had more of healing abilities. So that's fascinated me. We have a wonderful friend named Tony, and she sees spirit much different than Tanya does. And those are interesting conversations, how spirit comes through in different ways for different people. But as I kind of got tired of the dogma and the empty ritual of the Catholic Church, I really got interested in gnosis. And that's really what you're talking about, this direct, hey, I don't need an intermediary. Yeah, I can, so wonderful. So let's go ahead and talk about your 2011 book, Inca Mountain Magic. As an author, I always like to ask, how did that come about, your book?
Well, if you want, the most honest answer to that was, one, it wasn't the book I was set out to write. So I set out to write an opus. And what I realized was I hadn't lived enough life. I haven't had enough life experience. I knew what I wanted to write about, but I didn't have all the personal experiences to put into that first book. So I had to scrap it. And so I took on this different route. And it was, in my tradition, everything was orally passed, orally transmitted from lip to ear, and that's how it'd been done for centuries, partly because the indigenous people of that region had never developed an alphabet. So they had no way, except for symbols woven into things, to actually record things. And also because there's something about the like we were talking even before this, the improvisational magic that happens when things aren't written down. They can have new life breathed into them. It keeps things alive. So that was how my tradition was taught to me. It was delivered, an oral tradition delivered mouth to ear. And, you just sat with your teachers a lot so that you could absorb those understandings and the terminology and everything. And I had a lot of students asking, hey, could you make notes? Could I get a glossary of terms? And especially then, I relied really heavily on Quechua language because it's a beautiful language. You could call it a light language or something like that, but there's an interesting quality to it, to the language itself. Nowadays, I'm actually focusing a little bit more on English and the English translations of those Quechua words, because I found that sometimes the Quechua mystifies a person and they think, oh, if I don't have the terminology, I can't do the work. I won't know what's going on. So I've kind of reversed engineered that in myself to do less Quechua. But that was really what brought me to it. It was like, hey, all these people have asked for notes, so why don't I put down basically what I teach into a book? And then that really inspired me to make a book that anyone could pick up. Not a book that would read like stereo instructions exactly. It's a book anyone could pick up and feel the warmth in it and realize that what I'm really trying to get through to them is how they can make this work for them, and how they can start having experiences right now with this tradition and what it has to offer if they had never even touched the tradition before. And for all the other people, it would be a reminder and all the notes that they had been wanting for years. So that was really where I came from when I first wrote it. I really was excited to offer that to my students.
Right. Okay. Very cool. So I'd like to deep dive, and if some of it is, not to be disclosed, that's totally fine. But so you have this experience with the rainbow serpent, you do the research, then you journey to the Caro people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of Black Elk and, John Neihart shows up and he says, oh, finally you're here. I've been waiting for you. Kind of. Was it that kind of thing? Or was it the rainbow serpent that was sort of the entrance? Or how did that
The rainbow
unfold?
serpent was a big entrance for me. I was doing what I call medicine work or spiritual work before that. I've been doing it all my life, and probably because I was a preacher's kid, people kind of looked at me for counseling and stuff, even in our youth. So I'd always been doing kind of spiritual work, but I also always had a renegade spirit. But the serpent taught me so many things that I just had to understand. And then when I worked with my teacher, Juan, I told him that story of the rainbow serpent. And he said, well, you know what? I am looking for the rainbow's energy. That's something that I am presently trying. So I taught him what that serpent had taught me. So he was teaching me, and then it would flip around and I would teach him what it had taught me. And so it was an interesting kind of exchange. When I went to the Caro, that was another interesting kind of exchange because you just don't go there. Right. It's not like, hey, I'm going to go travel there. One, you have to stage an expedition because it's above Cusco, Peru. So you're going up into 16,000 feet to 21,000 feet above sea level. And you're going to a people who are very, in Western terms, impoverished. Because they live off the old ways. They survive from the food they grow, and they have to grow their food all over because they're so high up. They're growing a lot of different potato fields, and then they go down to the jungle, and that's where they grow crops like corn and things like that. And then they have their llamas that they take care of. So it's a very impoverished region. So you have to basically stage an expedition to go there because they don't have enough food to feed you. They would feed you, because they are some of the kindest, sweetest people in the world. But it was a few years in the planning just to get there. And you had to have every village or sometimes a couple groups of villages have kind of a spiritual elder, an el presidente, and a spiritual elder. So you have to get their permission to come to the villages. It's not just like, hey, you come because you want to. And even if they want you to come, if they read the coca leaf, which is their form of divination, if the mountains say, hey, you're not supposed to come, they won't let you in. They'll chase you away throwing rocks at you because, well, the mountains told you, no, you can't come there. So that was very interesting. But when I got there, it was I didn't know this at the time, but the person who was my guide taking me, he was also a Paco. He was also a medicine person. So he was taking me up there. And then from the first medicine person I knew that I met, instant camaraderie. Later that night, we were in ceremony together, just exchanging things, talking, about the tradition, different ways of doing what we call a despacho or hieroglyphy, which is their word for it, which is a prayer bundle, basically. So we had a lot of that, but yeah, it was really beautiful. And then at the end of all that, my guide comes to me and he's like, your ceremonies were so touching to me because it was, we do everything in Aini, which is divine reciprocity. So they're doing spiritual services for me. It's my job to do spiritual services back. They don't see themselves as the master teaching the student. They see it as, oh, you are also one of us. So we have this exchange that has to happen. So I did a big ceremony for them and he was just crying at the end. And then afterward, he was like, you touched me so much. I want to teach you. People don't know I'm a Paco, which is their word for shaman. But he was like, I want to teach you my family's tradition of this. So at that point, I started training under him, learning his family's way of doing these rituals and his family's viewpoint of these energetics that are happening and the grid works of the earth, because that's a big part of our work is what in the West they call ley lines. We call them sekes, and we work with those systems a lot and reestablishing them, empowering them. So, it was an interesting experience to meet my teachers and to work with them. There was a recognition, but it wasn't as dramatic as you see in movies and,
Right.
all of that. Yeah.
I love the reciprocity and the symbiosis. I'm such a strong believer in that. So let's see here. Let's talk about the idea of a balanced dualism, right? Spirit versus energy, science, spirituality, ancient versus contemporary or new age. How has been your experience of keeping dualistic things in balance?
Yeah, well, one of the things is this tradition that I teach, one of our big qualities at the level that I teach it is called Yanantan. And Yanantan means the harmonious energy between opposing forces. That's actually what the word means. And so in our training, we're trying to recognize opposing forces and the harmony that's created within it. And when I usually say that to someone, what they think about is, oh, you're looking for the similarities. You're saying, oh, we're similar in these ways, so we can get along because we have this basis of comparison. But actually in the Andes, that's not what Yanantan means. There's a whole other word for that, and that's called Misintan. And that's the harmonious energy between similar forces. So Yanantan's different. It's the celebration of differences is what it means. So it's the quality is I'm celebrating what's different about you. And through the celebration of it, we're going to discover something new. And especially at this time in our tradition, we call this the regathering. So at this time, the medicine people of the whole earth are coming back together and people are starting to kind of freely exchange their spiritual knowledge. Now, there's two ways we might go about that. One way is to sit there and listen to another person's spiritual knowledge and relate it to what we already have. And then, someone's sacred mountains become angels and all kinds of other things. And what ends up happening is you smooth over all the differences. And when you smooth over the differences, those little points where you're not agreeing, those little points where you see something totally different, but you have a similar understanding, those are places in, you know, something like natural science that are secondary independent reinforcers. You know, if two people came up with complementary information, but there's some differences in it, it proves that they are both talking about a law of nature, a law, and that neither one of them have it exactly correct. So if you take a scientific mindset and you look at the differences of the data sets, then you can start to construct maybe a more realistic model than if you just related away the differences. And I believe that that's something that the Andes has to teach to every tradition. I think that's the gold of the Andes, is this idea of Yonantan. Because in our culture, especially North American capitalist culture, we almost every one of our problems comes from the fact that we refuse to look at discrepancies between things. We refuse to look at inequality and injustice. We have these dreams, these high ideals of peace, justice, equality, liberty. But when we fall from those places, our culture tries to just kind of smooth it all over, keep everyone in line, smooth it over. And in that, we're not taking in the sanctity of what someone's going through. We're not taking in the true issues that another human is going through. And so what ends up happening is it builds up a pent-up type of energy that then has to be released in protesting, has to be just so that this group can say, hey, no, I'm not being treated equally. Hey, no, there are these discrepancies. Hey, no, we're not all rich. We're not all on this economic tier. And, I think that this idea that differences can be harmonious things, that we can actually find gold within our differences. And that in my tradition, especially, the idea is that once we can openly talk about these things with each other and see the differences, what will end up happening is a brand new spiritual tradition will happen. A brand new scientific tradition will happen that incorporates all these extra data points. And then that will bring the gold. That will create the new myths of the future, which we need, the new stories of the future, the new religions of the future. So it's very important. But in my tradition, we also believe that this reality is created through dualism. A lot of spiritual traditions, you're trying to reach oneness. And we often jokingly call that the path of slow suicide. You reach the oneness, and then it becomes almost an addiction where you're trying to stay in that oneness state, that it takes you further and further away from your humanity, further and further away from the other people. And what, just we ponder, what is the good of that? What is the good of that? So the shamans, the brujos, the curanderos and stuff, they have these high mystical spiritual experiences, but then they try to bring it back to the community. Right. They choose, like the Buddha, to come back in to the realm of trauma, to come back into where people are suffering, and to apply that as medicine to try to help people, to soothe them, to help them make steps in their own life, to help them move forward. So I really believe this balanced dualism is something that our culture desperately needs, and spirituality in general desperately needs, is to look at that, because otherwise spirituality is going to become nothing more than cliches that make great little memes and great little sound bites, but have no real meat to them at all. Like you were saying, the dead ceremonies of the church that you went to and all that, that's what is at stake, is everything becoming devoid of the sacredness, devoid of the energy it once had. So we really believe that dualism is an important part. It's not all about unity. We all understand unity. It's on one level, but that's not where we are. We're here at this level. So learning how to take those beautiful insights we get in that unity consciousness, and how can we bring that back? How can we bring it back so that it can be used as a medicine for people who are suffering right now in this world, and accepting their suffering as something real?
Yeah. Oh, that's wonder. I have in as a storyteller and a teacher of story, where I take a lot of shamanic concepts, precepts, and apply them. Um, this taking what could be perceived as opposites, and really living in that dynamic tension where a third thing is born from them. And
Absolutely.
that's what you're talking about. So I think that's a great way to move into, probably everyone in history has said, oh, this is a very challenging and dangerous time that we're in. And it's getting increasingly so. But for a lot of reasons, right? We have this whole AI thing, and then there's this very interesting talk about, crashed UFOs and bodies and all this thing, that's happening in Congress now, and this push pull with the military industrial complex and all. Our economic systems are changing. The Earth is changing. These big weather events, all of this, what happened in Maui in Canada, and all of this. Um, you talk about the increasing need for spirituality. Let's frame that. Like, what does spirituality get us, that it's so important now? And that's not a trick question, because I
Mhm.
believe in that 100 times. But how are you perceiving the changes that are happening on Earth? How are you reading them?
Well, we of course we've been through a major trauma with COVID. That's something that there's a collective soul loss from whole cultures, and from whole ways of being, because we lived through that. We made it through, and we're looking at the repercussions of it. But all of these things that you're speaking about, the weather patterns, all of this is priming us for something that is a unique opportunity that it has not always made itself available to humanity. There's been certain times in the past that this opportunity has come up, and usually it comes up with some type of avatar, some type of God person who comes to Earth and kind of teaches the path of liberation of some sort, and helps that culture, helps the Earth enter into a golden age. And I believe we're at one of those points right now as humanity. I think we're stepping out of our spiritual adolescence and into our spiritual adulthood. And one of the things that makes spirituality so important at this time is, spirituality once was used to control us. And for a very long time, it was used in very bad ways. And we collectively as humanity kind of turned against it. And then science, the age of illumination happened, and science was here. And we turned to it as a way of freeing ourselves from the constraints that the old world religion had put on us. And so we turned to it. But what ended up happening is, it because of what science is and what science has to be, it removed the sacredness. It did a reductionist view of everything, and it removed the sacredness. So now nothing meant anything anymore. There was all these beautiful theories and all this really cool stuff going on, but it's just like kind of random, and why these things collide, why two people run into each other, all of that is just kind of coincidental, and it doesn't really mean anything in the greater sense of the word. Where I believe that's where shamanism, especially the indigenous traditions of the world, has something to teach us. Because one thing is, they teach us respect. Just like you were talking about Gnosis and the Gnostics, those Gnostic mystery schools, that was really kind of Europe's shamanism, the ancient traditions of Europe. And, they taught in a much different way. It was about place, and it was, where were you born? Where were you raised? And you were initiated into the mysteries of that place. Even here in the Americas, where you were nomadic, there was still a place you were born and you frequented. You went back to, you migrated through over and over again. And there was important things for you to do when you were there, because you were born there. It was your place of emergence. It meant something. It wasn't just some random circumstance. You were born there. It really means something. And if you could look at your life and look at the fact that where you were born holds important keys to who you are becoming, then you can find meaning again in your life. But it's all about bringing back meaning. Understanding Mother Earth is a living spirit that can be communicated with. Nature beings are out there, and other spirits are out there, and everyone has unique gifts to connect with them. um, and I think that it's something that's very needed right now, because things like the school shootings, just to, not even touching on those bigger things like weather patterns and stuff, but school shootings and mass shootings that are happening, I believe is because people feel pointless. I believe people have a loneliness within them, and they have this kind of feeling that everything is meaningless. That's what they're being told from everything, and that everything is superficial. So all you ever have to do is put on the right facade, and then you'll succeed, or anything else. And that just has created this meaningless box where people are pent up, and that energy has to go somewhere. They're screaming out to be noticed. They're screaming out, I'm special, but I'm being told I'm not. What can I do to get someone to notice me? What is the biggest thing I can do where people will say, where all these people who hated me will be like, whoa, he was important, he did this, And I really think that's what it is. People are just scrambling for that 15 minutes of fame, and just scrambling to get noticed and to mean something. And also, I think it doesn't sit well with the human to hear that life is just meaningless. And I think that, part of it is we're trying to strike out against that to see if it's true or not. Do these drastically horrible things in reality to see if it's truly meaningless, if we feel different, and I think that that's a lot of it. In the mountains where my tradition comes from, they help you as you're growing up, and you're taught all the life skills you need to know. And then when you're basically an adult, they build you a house. It's not a house like we would think of. It's like smaller than most people's bathroom, but you have a house and you have everything you need to survive. There's no idea of poverty in those communities. There's no idea of starvation and any of those things, because you have community. It's not the idea of like The Secret or something, that if you just have the right spiritual formula, you're going to be uber successful and everything. That's not what I've seen. What I've seen is that these people, if they weren't so spiritual, they would have died a long time ago, because there would have been no meaning in their life, and their lives are hard and they need that meaning. And what I see are people who are living in perfect harmony with nature. So they don't have it's not like they're thriving to Western standards, but they always get through, and they never seem to have fear that they won't. They're never, because they have community. The only word they have that even kind of hints at poverty or being poor, all it means is to be without family or to be without community. To them, that's the only true poverty. As long as you have your community, as long as you have your family, you're going to be all right, Yeah.
Wow. Right on. Oh, wow. I'm just kind of processing here. So, and I'm sure the audience is too. So we'll take a breath. Let's okay, I'm going to hold that. So you talked about imagination, and for me as a creative, as an actor, a writer, creative, immersive experiences, a storyteller, I love that. And here's why. When I was reading Carlos Castaneda's books, and never mind, all the things we've learned, and there's such value there that I compartmentalize that. But there's this great moment in the first book where he becomes a bird, and he says, to Don Juan, he says, did I really become a bird? And he says, well, did you become a bird? And I thought, well, that's it, because I've had so many experiences where, hey, it might have been imagination, but it still opened doors and created new levels and new doorways and passageways and illuminations. When you say imagination and talk about imagination in spiritual development, is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yeah. So imagination is something that's very important, and we all know it when it comes to children. It's a way of making sense out of your world. It's a way of kind of trying different things out to see what will work, and those qualities continue into adulthood. It's just that we in our culture have been taught to believe that we're supposed to grow out of imagination, right, that we're not supposed to play anymore. We're not supposed to have those things. But if we really look at it, all of the great inventions, all the great stories, of course, all the movies and art and music that really enriches our life, it all came from imagination. It all came from someone's imagination. So imagination is the font of inspiration. It's really where that divine spark is within us, and it's our direct connection to divinity. What we end up getting things on top of it. So what we're really saying a lot of times when you say, "Oh, it's just my imagination running away with me," or something like that, what you're really trying to say is that you interpreted the data wrong. You know, I had this experience, but I interpreted the data wrong because I went on a flight of fancy. And so that's not really always the case. Imagination is what opens the spiritual door. So if you're sitting there and you're meditating, or you're trying to astral project, or doing a shamanic journey or whatever, and you're trying to keep your imagination out of it, one, you're driving yourself insane.
Yep.
And two, you're not going to have any real experience. You're not going to have an experience that you can trust, because you're going to say, "Oh no, it was just my imagination running away with me." So I often talk about a disciplined imagination, which is a little bit different. But you can only discipline your imagination if you allow yourself to have imagination, if you allow yourself to have daydreams, if you allow yourself to have those moments, because the way that you slip into those experiences is the exact same way a trance slips over you, is the exact same way a journey experience happens, is that you fall into it. You have to fall back into it, and clouds come up over your eyes, and then you start to see something. Well, that's the same thing that happens when we daydream. Clouds come up over our eyes and we start to see stuff. So that's where we start with all of this. And if we can have ourselves a strong imaginary life, then we start to really open up those spiritual doors. We start to allow more information to come through, because the information's there and it's just waiting to come through. And then when it comes through, it has to have a way it's processed. So that might be through vision for some people. So they have that information comes through and they start to see stuff. For other people, they just start to know stuff. And it's really about realizing how that works for you. But you won't know unless you allow the experience to happen. One of the things people do is they get analytical. They think that they're going to go into a spiritual experience with their analytical mind. And the analytical mind is a negation machine. Its purpose is to say, this is not like that. That is not like this. That's all it does. This is safe. That's dangerous. That's all the analytical mind's job is. So, if you can go into more of that play-like state where your analytical mind just doesn't have to have a big role in it, then you allow yourself to sink into the experience. You can have a really deep experience. And then afterward, let the analytical mind probe it and let it look for symbols and clues as to what was being given to you, because then it has a role. But inside of the experience, your analytical mind has no role whatsoever, because it's always taking you out of the experience to process it. Oh, is this happening for me? Is this happening for me? And that just keeps you from actually going into it. So we have a word, pukliai, and it means play in Quechua, but it's also means ritual. It also means work. So pukliai is the sacred work is like play. So we teach people to approach the work as if they're playing. And if you approach the work in the spirit of play, number one, you're going to elevate the type of energy that's in the experience itself. Number two, you're going to allow things to happen that you wouldn't normally allow. And number three, you're going to be in the experience instead of thinking you're someone who's controlling the experience. Because the truth is, we don't make those experiences and we don't control them. Most of us would say we're grateful or happy to just be part of the experience, to be one of the people playing a role in it, and so that's a very important thing, and I sometimes ask my students, when was the last time you played? And I don't mean a card game. I don't mean a video game. I mean, when was the last time you allowed your imagination to paint scenarios that don't exist, and you were a character inside of those scenarios trying to find your way, and you gave yourself these parameters and you allowed yourself to go out and just play with it, because that's one of the oldest spiritual traditions in the world. That's taking on God forms. That's where the theater comes from. That's where all of this stuff that really enriches all of our lives, they were ancient spiritual techniques at one time. So if we can allow ourselves to play as adults and we can really get into that mindset like a child, the innocence of a child, but with the intelligence of an adult, we can dream up so many beautiful things and so many solutions to problems that we have right now. So, imagination is one of the most important parts of spiritual development.
Right, right. Thank you. This whole evening has been incredibly affirming to me. So I thank you for that. But my work over the past 30 years is taking my work in the theater as a storyteller. And as I thought I was on this parallel track of the spiritual studies, the shamanic studies. We had a sweat lodge on our property that Lakota built in West Virginia, and going through that whole journey and seeing the overlaps, and then going back to the theater text and saying, these teachers were talking in very spiritual terms. So, and it really does come down to that wonderful 4-letter word, play, that encapsulates imagination. It has structure, but has freedom. So thank you for that. So with the time we have left, I want to talk about two-word concepts that you had in your talking points that I think are really important for people now. And the first one is toxic positivity. So many of us who do this kind of work or similar work talk about this. We know it when we see it. How do you define it, and what are the dangers of it?
Well, the biggest way I define it from my point of view is that toxic positivity is kind of this idea that if you are 100% positive all the time, good things happen to you. And that if you have just one little slip up of a negative idea, a negative thought, a negative imagining of a situation, that you have somehow damned yourself. And what it ends up becoming is this thing where people who you're going to for spiritual insight gaslight you. They aren't really listening to what you have to say, and they're just throwing it back in your seat. Well, you're the reason that's happening to you. And if you had better self-talk, that wouldn't happen, and these other things. And it's absolutely true that if we have a positive mindset, we're more resilient in life. That it's easier to get over hurdles and things like that. But I absolutely know in my own life, I've had a negative mindset and manifested beautiful and rewarding experiences through that negative mindset. So, it kind of has become a dogma that if you think a certain way, your life's going to be golden. And if it isn't, well, it's your own fault. You're to blame for it. And as soon as you learn to think better, it will get better for you. And that's once again becoming cliche. Mm-hmm. So if you go and you tell someone that, and all they have is these beliefs in negative things happening in their life, in things not working out for them, the fears that's all their experience has ever showed them. So you just giving them some cliche of saying, hey, just think positive and everything's going to be golden for you, bro. That's not really helping them. And it's just kind of a way of the people who do it are kind of protecting themselves, because when they hear it, they're triggered. Something gets triggered in them, and they're hurting for you, or they're hurting because they have the same experience and they're trying to hide from it with their own positivity, a mask that they're hiding behind. And so that's what I mean by toxic positivity. It's that everything's going to go golden for you if you just think a certain way, or if you just use this verbiage instead of that verbiage. And I've seen people who have put themselves into really bad, anxious states. I know other spiritual people who started following something like that for a while, and they became paranoid. Mm-hmm. And I mean truly paranoid, where they're worrying about everything. You can see all the extra processing going on in their head. Now, how are you in the moment now, and how are you sharing an experience with someone else if all your processing is, am I using the right words? And will these words give me what I'm trying to get out of life? And, and you're having a conversation with someone. So are you really listening to them in those moments, or are you just processing, your own stuff? And then, that becomes you becoming the thought police for them. Oh, no, you can't think like that. And I really think that degrades relationships, because you're not allowing, especially NLP and things like that, there's reframing and pattern interrupts. And and like I tell my students, they're very powerful techniques. And when they're used right, they can help someone make changes in their life right now. The problem is they're kind of like an organ transplant. They're not from your mind, those reframes and those pattern interrupts. So eventually your body your psyche starts to try to purge them.
Right.
Eventually they quit working. And the reason why is because they're not your mindset. They're not things that you truly believe. So there's a place for those. And usually it's when someone needs to make a choice right now in this moment that we can give them a pattern interrupt or reframe something, and then they can go out there and change that. But if you're a healer, what you're really wanting to see is when they reframe it for themselves. All you're trying to do is hold the light for them. You're holding the light, and in that way, you're holding them in kind of a loving embrace until they see the light. You can't show it to them. They'll never see it if you point it out. But you just hold that vision for them, that vision of their healed state. And then one day you're talking with them and they look up and they go, I just realized something. Now they can take that home with them because it's from themselves. It's inspiration that happened inside of them, and it's made real physiological change in them. Where if you gave them a reframe, that's not real physiological change. That's a psychological change that they can use in the moment, but it will wear out after a while.
Right. Oh, right on. So good. So let's not go into detail because we're getting into, but we all know this, they charge a lot of money and they kind of set themselves up as gurus, and people go to see them and it's like, yeah, use these words and this framing and this $50 CD and all of this kind of stuff. And then when it doesn't happen to people, then they go, well, what the hell's wrong with me? Like these people because the people they trot up are the success stories. And you watch the documentaries, and a lot of Joe Campbell's work has sort of been co-opted by all these gurus, right? And they said, oh, well, I needed $500, and then suddenly a cake showed up at my house, and I opened up the box, and there was $1,000. So it makes the people who these things aren't happening to feel less than. And that an interesting thing that I started to see, because I was getting engaged in some of these practices, was when something does happen, then people go, see, it was because of that dude's program. And you go, no, I still showed up and I still did the work. And I remember having a very kind of like loud conversation with someone a number of years ago, because something kind of big came into my life that I've been working on for a long time. And they're like, see, it's because of so-and-so and those CDs. And I got kind of defensive about it. So, that's toxic too. If you can't participate in your own success when it does come. So let's use the rest of the time to talk about prosperity spirituality.
Okay. Yeah. It's something we kind of touched on it a little bit. So there's different forms of it, of course. And I would say that the biggest form of it came from prosperity Christianity. And then it was co-opted into other spiritual things. And it's kind of it's kind of like that idea with the toxic positivity. There are things we can do to make our lives better, but it's work. Like you were saying, you have to do the work. I can do a spell for someone to get a job, but if they don't go out and apply for that job, they can't get it. If they don't take the time to improve their image, to clean up, for the interview, they're not going to get it. Magic doesn't just give it to you. The universe, when you do something like magic, you get the closest possible thing that the universe can manifest for you within physics, within the realm of physics. It's not going to break physics to bring you something. It's going to say, well, this is the closest thing to what they're asking that I can manifest for them. And so there's a whole process, like if you're someone who has no job and you're just really trying to find a job, and it's like your first job, or you've been out of work for a very long time, and you do a spell, maybe you did a spell or some kind of magic or some kind of healing work to clear you so that you could get, and you're really thinking, I want a CEO job. Well, the universe can't bring that to you. Maybe even if you have a degree in business and stuff, the universe just can't hand you that, but maybe it brings you something like you suddenly get an opportunity for middle management at a bank or something. Now, what some people would say is, well, that's not what I was looking for, and I'm not going to put any energy into that. Not understanding that if they would put energy into that, that increases that energy within their, now they're employed. Now they have the standing of an employed person looking for a job. And who knows, maybe this job is going to lead there to what they were really wanting. Or maybe it's just a stepping stone. But now you have more energy, so you can do another type of spell. But doesn't matter how many spells you do, if you don't put yourself out there, if you don't do the work, it's not happening for you. And prosperity, spirituality is kind of like cheating you. It's saying, I'll give you a shortcut that gets you there. This series of words will get you there. Think this affirmation alone and you'll get there. And, and like we were saying, and if you don't, well, it's not my fault for creating the affirmation. It's your fault because you're using it wrong, or you're not in the proper state of mind when you use it. And so that's really what I meant by prosperity spirituality. It's like, like most of the bona fide spiritual teachers I know, some of them have big communities and they have some affluence coming in, but most of them would really be the most impoverished people. That's how we'd see them. The Kero and the shamans of Mongolia, the shamans in, Siberia, the people in Africa that do this work, they aren't the richest people in the culture.
Right.
The spiritually minded aren't the richest. They aren't the most affluent usually, but they do always have enough, and they have a different type of wealth. They have a wealth where they feel confident in life. They truly have hope. They don't practice hope. They have hope. They truly have faith. They don't have to sit there and try to believe something that's not true. They know it's already truth for them. That's one of the other things is, we were raised with this concept of faith from the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is, a belief in things unseen, where in most traditional cultures, your faith comes from what you do see. It comes from doing something and then having an experience, and then getting to the point where you realize, when I do this experience happens. So I have faith now. It didn't ask for anything, except for the benefit of your doubt. Never ask for anything more than that.
Right. So and I hope I'm not opening something really big, because we're just past the hour, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about the Qatari tradition of cross-cultural shamanism that you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Qatari tradition, Qatari is a name of a process of spiritual development in the Andes. And it's also part of the prophecy of the return of the Inca, basically. And it has to do with the serpent, because that was how I was brought in by that spirit. The Qatari is seen as a type of rainbow serpent. So it all kind of ties together with that. So what it actually is it's a tradition of cross-cultural shamanism. All of the techniques pretty much come from the Andes that I teach inside of it. But why we call it cross-cultural is because people in our culture, we're a melting pot. They come from all over. So I have understanding of mystic Christianity. I have understanding of Buddhism. I don't relate these things away to it, but that allows me to be able to deliver that information to someone who has that background, because I can touch on things, or if they have questions, I can say, oh, okay, well, this is how that sees that, and this is how this tradition sees that same thing. It's similar but different, to always point out the differences. And so that's what it is. It's a mixture of several Paco Cuna traditions. One of them is the Huascar tradition, which is a royal tradition. It comes from Huascar Inca, the last officially selected Inca. Wow. It's his tradition, and it came down through Don Benito, which was one of his great-great-grandchildren. Great-great-great-great-grandchildren, but that's kind of where that lineage, the Huascar lineage, came in. Then there's the Incari lineage, which is the Kero and their lineage. The underlying principles are all the same, the understandings and the terminology that's used. But in every one of these traditions or lineages, it's seen just a little bit differently. And once again, we believe in paying attention to those differences and not trying to relate them away, but trying to understand why it's different, using them as contemplations. And then it's also mixed with the northern coast of Peru tradition of curanderismo, which is more Spanish. It has more Spanish elements in it, but is still an indigenous tradition. Mixed also with the Calawaya, which is a Bolivian tradition.
Wow.
So these traditions are one thing that unites them all is they were all the Inca Empire. And what we've realized, myself and contemporaries and my colleagues that I work with and stuff, what we have realized bringing the Western mindset into that is that we have discovered that these different traditions held different keys of spiritual development, and that it's the merging of them together. Now, no man can go and learn every tradition from every family in a region like that. But we can see that there's a lot of healing work that's done in the curandero tradition. We can see there's a lot of mystical work done in the Inkari tradition, and so we can kind of see, oh, this tradition brings these type of effects. This one brings this type of effect. And they're all united because they're all connected and were once one tradition.
Right.
It's like your family might do it a little differently than I do, but so we're it's like making a patchwork quilt. We're bringing it all back together. And then the fact that I teach Westerners, I was, my teachers were like, now you go to America and you be the shaman up there, so that they don't have to come down here anymore. So that they can get these teachings in their own land and they can learn what's sacred about their own land. Because people they'll go down there to train and things like that. And then they come back here and they perform some of it, but they don't do all of it, because, oh no, the energy of Peru is so sacred. The mountains talk to you and all that. They talk to you because people have been talking to them in an unbroken tradition for thousands of years. Here in North America, we quit doing that. Our lands are just as sacred. And our job at this point in history is to reawaken those nature spirits, to bring the sacredness of the earth back.
There you go. Well, that's awesome. So the last thing I want to do before you tell people how they can get in touch with you and learn more about your workshops and all that kind of stuff is there are so many people right now who are going, I'm lonely. Everything's broken. There's no way out. The best days are behind us. Might as well give up. Can't even get out of bed. What is your response?
Well, I can't give a generic response to that because every person's the matrix that builds up. And I'm not talking about like the movie, The Matrix, but the mental, emotional matrix that's wrapped around core trauma and belief systems that each individual has is so unique that it really is about working with that person and finding a process, finding their process through that. So, I don't have like a catchphrase I can say to all those people.
Yeah.
But loneliness is the biggest problem facing our society. It's not in all societies, but modern humans are suffering loneliness at an increase. It seems increased. And it's strange because we have all this social media to connect us. But then again, we connect in a superficial way.
Right.
So many people are using social media as a way of creating a persona that's not really them. To put out there and to just test the waters with different things instead of being their authentic self. And I really think that's the key to it all, is to find something that's going to bring you to your authenticity. Right. See, Spirit talks to all of us different, and we each have a one-on-one connection with Spirit. And what a skilled spiritual teacher does for you is help you find how to connect to Spirit. And it may not be the way they do because it's not about them. It's about you. And you have to help the person discover what's sacred and what's beautiful in them. And when they start to discover that, it starts to open up like a rose inside of them. And that gives you momentum. That gives you, even when things are rough and you acknowledge they're rough, no spiritual bypassing, no toxic positivity. Acknowledge when you're having a rough time. That's used to be what it was about. You went to God and you screamed, hey, this isn't what I want. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. And if you're not going to be that real with the spirit world, how can you believe that you're going to develop a relationship where they're going to be that real back to you? Right. You have to bring what's real in you. You don't have to fake positivity. If you're depressed, tell the spirit you're depressed. Cry. Throw yourself a pity party. Really get into it and really give that to spirit. But then you've got to clear yourself. It's almost catharsis. You have to let that just pour out of you. And then usually there'll become a still moment.
Yeah.
And in that still moment, that's when the spirit can speak back to you. When you're done, going over your story, when you're done with all of that, you have to do all that, give all that to them, and then you get clear and you get an inspiration. And that's what changes your life. And it's different for everyone.
Right on. I had so many profound experience in 3 years of Sweat Lodge when it was on the property, but that I was custodian of. And but the genuineness of the prayer, the genuineness of the supplication, in the lodge during those prayers, men with autistic children or who were looking for that right job or to help someone whose alcoholism was destroyed. And they would cry and they would supplicate. We were in the dirt and we were sweating and I was from a tradition where we did really hot sweat. So there was there was that element of suffering, but for a greater good. And then when you emerged into that cool night air with all the stars, in a West Virginia holler. So thank you for that. That just recalls to me that was the most profound thing, that authenticity. So we are out of time, but where can people find out about Wild Hearts Medicine Society, get your book, learn about your workshops, and connect with you?
Well, the book they can get on Amazon. They can also get it at Barnes & Noble. There'll be another book coming out soon. I was hoping it would be done actually before this, but I just haven't finished it yet. But another way of getting a hold of me is Facebook. I'm on Facebook. People can contact me there. WildHeartsMedicine.com is my website. There's also another one that I have that I'm building out right now called ZaneCurfman.com, but it doesn't have anything on it at this moment.
Okay.
That's another way to get a hold of me. I do a lot of teachings in the Cleveland area, oftentimes through a store called Goddess Elite. So that's another way, you can contact Melissa or Hank Setala and talk to them. They're both students of mine and they help me with the work that I do. So those are all ways to get a hold of me. But if you find me, just reach out. I don't do a whole lot of advertising or anything like that. It's we kind of rely on word of mouth and that kind of grassroots kind of effort to get people involved. But yeah, get a hold of me on Facebook, wildheartsmedicine.com. Those are the easiest ways.
Cool. Right on. So everyone, we went a little longer than I wanted to, but we can actually go all night. I have had dozens of people on this show, Zane, who do this kind of work. And I kid you not, I think you are the most articulate that I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with. Thank you so much. I'm sure your workshops are absolutely amazing. The teacher is just so alive in you. It's wonderful. So thank you very much, guys. I will see you next week. We're going to shift gears in a crazy way. And we're going to talk about Project Azorian, which was the CIA and Howard Hughes trying to recover technology from a downed Russian sub in the Pacific. So join Craig Ansel and I when we talk about that. I will see you next time on Into the Outer Realms, where the paranormal and the supernatural are just normal and natural. So thank you all, Zane, again. Namaste. Thanks to you, sir.
Absolutely.